Pivot tables are a great way to summarize large amounts of data in Excel. So in this video, we're going to learn how to create dynamic pivot tables, a bunch of different ways to customize them, how to create pivot charts, and how to make them even more dynamic with slices. And if you'd like to grab a copy of the Excel file I use in this video, just click on the link in the description below. Now on this worksheet, we've got some sales data for some retail stores. And as you can see, we've got regions, store names, dates, sale IDs, product names, product categories, and the sale amounts. And what we're going to do is create a pivot table out of this data. Now, before we do, there's a few things that we have to do to clean up this table of data. First of all, we need to remove any blank rows or columns. So we can't have any gaps between our data. So we need to remove column G because there's nothing in it. So we'll just right click and delete that one. And then we also need to remove row 8 and we need to remove row 18. So now you can see we don't have any blank rows or columns in our range of data. The other thing we need to do though is remove the total row down the bottom. So we just right click on that and delete. And now all we've got is the header row, which we need, and the actual data for each sale. Now the first pivot table we create, we're going to do it without creating a table out of this data. And then I'll undo that and I'll show you why you should create a table first before you create a pivot table. Okay, so to create a pivot table, just out of the data that we've got here, we just need to go to Insert in the ribbon and then Pivot Table. And then we need to select from Table/Range. Now, because I didn't click anywhere on the range of data, Excel doesn't know what to choose for the table range. So we can do that manually by clicking on the arrow and then selecting the data like this and clicking on the arrow again. But I'll just cancel out of there and show you that if you click somewhere on the range of data and then go Insert Pivot Table, Excel will guess as to what range of information you want to include in the pivot table. And as you can see from the dotted green line going around the header row and all the data, it has guessed correctly. The next thing you need to do is choose whether you want your pivot table to be on a new worksheet or an existing worksheet. Now I'm going to put it on this worksheet so we can see it next to the data, which means I need to click on that button and then choose a location. And once again, I just click on this arrow and then I can just click on cell I1, which is going to be the top left for the pivot table. And then I'll click on the arrow again and everything is selected, so I can click OK. And now Excel has put in this panel here, which is basically a placeholder for the pivot table. And it's also opened up this panel for pivot table fields. So I'm just going to make that a bit bigger and just move it over here a little bit more. Okay, now in this pivot table fields box, you can see that we've got a list of the fields here. So we've got region, store, date, sale ID, product name, product category, and sales. And those come from the header row. So whatever you have in your header row, that will end up being a field name inside of the pivot table selector here. Okay, so let's just create a basic pivot table to see how this works. So the first thing you want to do is decide on what data you actually want to summarize. And in this table of data, there's really only one field that can be summarized, and that's the sales amounts. So what you need to do is put the sales field into that values box down in the bottom right. And you can do that in one of two ways. You can left click on here, hold it down and just drag it down like that. And you can see now that box has been checked. But if I uncheck it and then just check it again, you can see that Excel has correctly guessed that that's the field that we want summarized. And like I said before, that's because it's really the only field that can be summarized. So if we had more than one column of data that had numbers in it, Excel may not have guessed that, and you would just drag it down there instead. Okay, so up here on the right, starting in cell I1 that I chose before, you can see that we now have the beginning of the pivot table and we don't have that placeholder there anymore. So now that we've got sales there, let's just choose a way to summarize it. And a good way to summarize that would be by store. So we can come up here and once again, we can check the box like this and let Excel guess as to where we want it. And you can see that it's put it down into the rows panel. So it's categorizing the sales by store and it's doing it by rows. So that was a good guess from Excel. But if I uncheck that, I'll just show you that you can also just use the mouse and drag it down. Okay, the next thing I'm going to show you is why you should create a table out of your data before you create a pivot table. But before we do that, I'm just going to change the categorization here to product name. Okay, so you can see that's been added to rows down here. And over on our pivot table, you can see that the sales is now summarized by product name, and there's one product name in each row. Okay, let's just come out of there. And what I'll do is I'll come down to the bottom here and I'll add on the data for another sale. So we're going to be adding data to our range here. Okay, I've just added a sale for a smart TV for $1,400 for the Highgate store in the South. And I've given it a unique sale ID. Now, this is the only sale for the smart TV product name. So if it does feed through to the pivot table, we should see it pretty easily because a new row will emerge and it'll have smart TV on it. So let's just right click on the pivot table. And the way you update it is you click on refresh. So now the pivot table has been updated, but we can't see that smart TV in there. So because we didn't format our data as a table first, it's not dynamic. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to delete this pivot table. So I've just right clicked on it and I've deleted the pivot table, and we'll come down here and we'll delete this sale as well. And we'll start from scratch. So now click anywhere on the data, press Ctrl T to create a table. And you can see from the dotted green lines that it's selected all of the data and the header row. And we do want to leave my table has headers checked and click on OK. Okay, and so now you can see by the formatting and also because of the drop down arrows at the top that we have an Excel table. Now we'll just click on the table and we'll go up to table design, and I just want to rename the table. So I've just called it sales data. And now if we click back onto the table anywhere and go to insert and pivot table. Now in our pop-up, you can see that Excel has picked up that we want to use the table called sales data for our pivot table. And the reason I renamed it is so that we can easily identify it at this step. Okay, so once again, let's do it in this worksheet, and I'll just pick the location and click OK. And now we have the same placeholder there. So let's come over here, click on sales, and we'll click on the product name. So we have the same pivot table that we had just before. And now that we have a table, we're going to be able to add more data to it, and it's going to be able to dynamically feed through to the pivot table. So if we come down to the bottom here and type in that sales data again. Okay, so I've just added the same information that I added before for the smart TV. And as you can see, the table has expanded down another row. So now if we come up to our pivot table and we right click on it and refresh, now you can see it's added a new row for the smart TV, and it's picked up all of the sales data and added it up. So there's only the one sale for $1,400, and there it is. So that's the reason why you want your original data to be formatted as a table in Excel before you make a pivot table out of it. Okay, let's play around with the settings now. So instead of having it summed by product name, I'll just show you that you can do it by other fields as well. So there's region, so we've just got north and south, the grand total of 20,240. We can click on store, and then we have it broken down by store, and you can see we've got the same grand total. We can do it by date. So there's only 2 dates in this table of data, the 1st of January and the 2nd of January. Again, we get the same total. Sale ID, we wouldn't use that here because they're all unique. But then you've got product name, and you've also got product category. I'll also show you that you're not just restricted to sum. So if you come down here and click on sales in values, and then go to value field settings, you can change that to other things, such as count, average, max, min. So let's put it on count. And there you can see that we've got the count of the number of sales that have been made for each of those product categories. And over here, you can see that's changed to count of sales. If we go back in, we'll just have a look, and you can see that you've got a bunch of other different options as well. Okay, I'll just put that back to sum, and okay. Next, I'll just show you that just because we've got sales in there once, it doesn't mean we can't put it in again. So if I drag that down and put it here, and then change this to count, there you can see that we now actually have a sum of the sales amounts, and we also have a count of the sales amounts. Okay, I'm just going to put this back to product name so we've got more rows, and I can show you how to sort and filter. So if you come over here, you can right click and come down to sort, and you can sort smallest to largest or largest to smallest. And there's also other sort options as well. So let's just do smallest to largest. And now you can see the rows have been sorted in order from the lowest sum of sales to the highest. You could also go in and do it the other way around, largest to smallest. And you can do it over here for this column as well. And you can also filter. So if you come up to this drop down here, you can see there's different filters. So we can do this if we just wanted to look at the digital camera sales. So that's just showing those 2 rows now. And you've also got things like label filters and value filters, and there's lots and lots of different options in those. And once again, you've also got some sorting options up here. So if you wanted to sort that from A to Z, and let's remove that filter, then you can see that it's in alphabetical order of the product names. You can also move the rows up or down, so you can just highlight the row and then left click with the mouse and hold it down and just drag it up there and drop it. So I could drag this one down here and drop it. So that's how you can reorder things with the mouse. And you can also add filters over here. So let's say, for example, we drag store names down to the filters. You can see that that's added this panel up here. So we can come up here and let's say we just want to see Highgate, and okay. So now we're just looking at the sales for the Highgate store, and we're looking at that by product name. And we can also select multiple stores. So for example, we could do Highgate and Paddington, and that's a combination of the sales from those 2 stores. Okay, now I'm just going to remove count of sales, and I'll also remove this filter. And I'm going to bring in another sum of sales. And I'm going to show you that if you come over here and you right click on it and go down to show values as, you can choose percentage of grand total. And now you can see how much as a percentage the sales for each product is of the total. So for example, the digital camera X2, there's $3,000 worth of sales, and that's 14.82% of the total of $20,240. Okay, the next thing I'm going to show you is that you can change these heading names. So for example, you can come up here and click on here because sum of sales is not a really good heading name. And instead we could call that sales with a $sign. And over here, we can call this sales percentage. Okay, next, let's have a look and see how you can get multiple layers of categories. So if I drag region down into rows, now you can see that the categories by row has been divided up into the north and south regions, and then as a second level by product name. Now, if you wanted that the other way around, you would simply grab product name over here, drag it to the top, and you would put that above region. Okay, so I'll just put that back because it makes more sense for region to be on top. And I'll show you that you can do more than 2 levels. So let's grab date and we'll put that on top. And now you can see that our pivot table has 3 levels of categories. The first one is date, the second one is region, and then we have it by product name. Okay, so there's all different ways that you can summarize and display your data with pivot tables really easily just by moving things around in the pivot table fields box over here. Okay, I'll also just show you that you can expand and collapse these just by clicking on the plus and minus icons. And if you want to change the formats, just right click on one of the numbers in the columns, go to number format, and then choose the format that you want. So I'll do currency with no decimal places. And as you can see, that has applied that format to every single row in that column. And over here for the percentage, I'll just take that decimal place back 1. And now we have our percentages just with 1 decimal place. Okay, so I'm just going to click back on here, and then I'll just remove date because it's making our pivot table a bit too big. And I'll just show you that when you create a pivot table and you click on it, you get 2 new panels in the ribbon, and they are Pivot Table Analyze and Design. So let's go up to the Design tab, and I'll just show you that there's a lot of different things you can do. So you can choose a different pivot table style if you want. So you can actually have no style, or you can get whatever color scheme you like. So you just hover the mouse over the different color schemes here, and then you just choose whichever one you want. So I'll stick with that one. You also have some style options over here. So for example, you can toggle on and off the row header style. You've also got banded rows, column headers, and banded columns. So that's just changing the styles of those things. You've also got subtotal options. So we've got do not show subtotals. You can see that that got rid of the subtotals for north and south. Show all subtotals at bottom of group. So you can see we've got north total and south total now. And then you've got show all subtotals at top of group, which is what we had to start with. You've also got grand total options. So you've got off for rows and columns. So that's taken away the grand total down the bottom. We've got on for rows and columns. And you've got on for rows only and on for columns only. You've also got your report layout. So there's a few different options in there that you can look at. So that's the compact form. That's the outline form. There's the tabular form. But I'll just put it back into compact form. You've also got the option of inserting a blank line after each item. So you can see that's inserted a couple of blank lines there. And you can also remove those blank lines. Okay, so that's just some design options you've got there for your pivot tables. Okay, so I'm just going to remove everything from here right now. And we'll just go back to having sum of sales in the values. And I'll just show you how to use rows and columns together because we just did rows before. Okay, so I'll just click on store and we'll put that in the rows. and then we'll click on product name, and I'll put product name in the columns, and I'm going to have to come over here, and you can see that the pivot table has expanded quite a bit sideways because now we have our product names by column. So I'll come back over here and we'll swap those around. So we'll put store for columns and then product name for rows. And we'll scroll across. And now you can see we've got Highgate and Paddington, which means we've still got this filter on. So I'll just select all the stores. And now we've got all of the stores in our columns and a grand total as well in column N. And we've got our product names as the rows, and we've got the sum of sales for each, and the numbers that are showing are the sum of sales for each of those. So if I click back onto our panel here, what we can see is that the layout of our pivot table exactly matches what's in our panel. So you can see we've got rows down the left hand side, and then we've got columns up the top right, and then in the middle we've got the values, which is the sum of sales. So as you can see, you can visualize how your pivot table is going to turn out by what you put in each panel over here. Now, although this pivot table is a good way of summarizing the data, it's not very visually appealing. So let's create a chart out of it. But first, I'll just come up to our pivot table field options, and I'll just remove this one so that all we have is just the sum of sales by product name, just to keep it simple. Now, to insert a pivot chart, you just need to click on the pivot table, go to Pivot Table Analyze in the ribbon, and then click on the Pivot Chart button, and then just choose the type of chart that you want. I'll just go with this clustered column chart. And I'll make it a bit bigger so that we can see it better. So for example, this is the $8,000 worth of sales for the extra large TV, and this is the $3,000 worth of sales for the digital camera X2. Now the chart is dynamic, so if for example we deleted the row with the smart TV, and then we refreshed our pivot table, you can see that the smart TV category and the sale has completely disappeared from our chart. And the same thing goes for if you add more data to your table and then refresh your pivot table, the chart will refresh and we'll add the data in there. Another thing that you can do, if you click on the chart and go to Pivot Chart Analyze, is insert a slicer. So if we click on that button and come down here, we can insert a slicer for, say, the region and the store, and click on OK. So for example, we could click on Highgate for the store, and now we're just seeing the sales for Highgate. We can click on Paddington, and now we're seeing the sales just for Paddington. Or we can do a multi-select, and we could choose a couple of stores together. So we've got Paddington plus Smallville plus Tunbridge there. So let's just clear that filter, and then we'll come over to the region and we can choose either north or south. So that's the sales just for north, and that's the sales just for south. And you can see how these slices make the pivot chart completely dynamic. And with just a few clicks of the mouse, you can have the chart show whatever information you need. Okay, so that's how you can create pivot tables, how you can add data to pivot tables, and also how you can create a pivot chart so you can get a more visual representation of your data, and how you can use slices to easily pick and choose what data you want flowing through to your pivot table and your pivot chart.